people are on the listener side or the viewer side in this case are increasingly seeing podcasting as a visual and audio medium, which is a little bit of a throwback to the earlier era for podcasting. When podcasting started, it was an audio and video medium, but now things have changed, right? And the expectation of audiences has changed as well. They like the option increasingly of being able to listen or watch and to have that option. And that's what the industry is really kind of trying to grapple with right now and make adjustments.
Welcome to another episode of That Podcast Exchange. This podcast is an insightful conversation with the people at the top of their game and deconstruct them to find tools, tactics, and tricks to help you achieve your dream goal as a podcast producer. He is the founder and host of Spoken Live Media and a Spoken Live show. He also the creator and the host of Live Podcast Tips with Rob Greenlee. He is a former Senior Vice President of Content and Partnership at Podbeans and Vice President of Podcast Content and Partnership at Liberated Syndication. He is a well-known public speaker, evangelist, and trainer for podcasting globally. He is also a former member of founding Board of Governors and a former chairperson of the Podcast Academy. 2017 Podcast Hall of Fame is one of my OG in podcasting that I look up. And aside from Dave Jackson and also Todd Cochrane, please welcome to the show, to the Dot Podcast Exchange, Mr. Rob Greenlee. How are you today, Rob?
I'm doing terrific, Miko. It's great to have me on your show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the time. I'm not sure if I'm able to ask you to be on my show, but I was surprised that you okay with the invitation. So sure. how's the podcast movement recently in Washington? Is there a lot of happening that our podcast producer learn and what's can be upcoming in podcasting industry?
Yeah, I think it was a year of kind of maybe a little bit of a transition to something, on the horizon that's new. And I think, the industry is kind of somewhat trying to figure out what its identity is going to be going into the future, and also trying to grapple with the business side of podcasting too, which has been a little bit of a transition and turmoil, and this happens oftentimes with economic conditions that have an impact on the commercialization of the podcast medium. There's a lot of companies that are cutting staff and changing strategies and pullbacks and things like that. And clearly we've been going through that. And that's what was indicative at the Podcast Movement event this year. There was less attendees. There was fewer booths, there to exhibit. So it's really a reflection of what's been happening in the podcasting space over I would say the last probably 8 to 10 months, that we've seen this kind of like a reshuffling of the deck to some degree as all these companies have been trying to grapple with the economic adjustments that have happened. And I've seen this before. I saw this happen back in 2008 through 2009. So back then it was a little different. And then I would say the other big part of it is that the industry is trying to grapple with this entry increasingly of video. And the industry itself has seen itself primarily over the last maybe 6-8 years as really mostly an audio-only medium. But with the recent entry of YouTube creating a podcast playlist in their platform and offering that, and then taking RSS feeds into their platform from the audio side and trying to get people to transition over to doing more video on their platform, it's kind of changed people's perceptions. And people are on the listener side or the viewer side in this case are increasingly seeing podcasting as a visual and audio medium, which is a little bit of a throwback to the earlier era for podcasting. When podcasting started, it was an audio and video medium. It's just that YouTube siphoned away a lot of those video creators in the early days because of the cost of bandwidth to host your own video files. It's pretty inexpensive to host an audio file because the file sizes are pretty small. But hosting, half an hour long videos back in like 2007, 8, 9 timeframe was very expensive. So, but now things have changed, right? And the expectation of audiences has changed as well. They like the option increasingly of being able to listen or watch and to have that option. And that's what the industry is really kind of trying to grapple with right now and make adjustments.
Yes, I saw the video of Tom Webster on Sound Profitable about the podcast landscape on the keynotes as a keynote speaker on Podcast Movement recently. That the video podcast been there of almost 2009, 2008 before, and now it's coming back. But what do you think his opinion that podcasting should be on audio, but the video is just like incorporated?
Yeah, I think that the whole thing is really kind of being a little bit misunderstood from the standpoint is that I think the perception is that it's one or the other, or it's required to do audio and video. And I think that's probably not the right way to look at it. Certain shows are going to be good for video, certain shows are going to be good for audio, and some of the other shows may be good for both. So it depends on your content. Not everyone needs to get into video, but I do think that increasingly as we look at the consumption side of podcasting, there is, especially linked up with the younger generations who are coming up, really prioritizing short form video, long form on the video side. And it's increasingly being shown in the research that YouTube is being seen now as the number one place to discover new podcasts, which points to this perception that people are perceiving what they see in YouTube. If a person is doing like a show like we are with two people with a mic and sitting there talking to each other, it must be a podcast, even though many of those shows on YouTube are just YouTube channels that are creating video content. It just so happens that they look like they're a podcast. But we're also seeing kind of happening as well is that some of those very popular YouTube creators are starting to say, well, maybe I'll create an audio version of my show. So that movement is going back to trying to make that audio available from their video, right? And some of them will do some additional editing. There may also be some other different types of monetization opportunities that could be available to them on the audio side that would require some editing and using of dynamic ad insertion or programmatic advertising that would be different than maybe what they're doing on the video side. So there is a little bit of kind of adjustment that's going on with that. And then to throw another monkey wrench into this is really all about doing stuff live. And that's what I've increasingly been doing here over the last year or so, is doing a lot of content that would be live on the video side, but then I take the audio from that and I put it out as an audio podcast as well. But I certainly have done many shows that would be pre-recorded and done in a more traditional kind of video format for YouTube, since most of the shows on YouTube are actually pre-recorded, edited, and then published to YouTube. They're not done live.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I was recently. I was joking with my friend. One of my friends told me that if you're doing a video, technically you're a podcast because you don't have any RSS feed. So,
right,
because he's saying podcasts should have a RSS feed. That's why it's podcast.
Well, that's what the traditional definition has been, and that included in the past audio and video. So, because RSS as a kind of like a syndication standard, because RSS means really simple syndication, And it's really a distribution tool. It's basically a document of sorts that is shared with other platforms, that shares your episodes and your metadata and your artwork and stuff in a very standardized way. And in one document, it's shared amongst lots of different consumption platforms or listening or viewing platforms that pull from the same document. So you can just publish once and it will go everywhere. So that is the power of it. And I've become a little bit vocal on this topic of, as an industry, we need to support video podcasts in its traditional form as a way to kind of like counter what's happening at YouTube, right? Because the cost of bandwidth now is a lot cheaper than it was back in the early days of podcasting. So there may be business models now that work now that maybe didn't back then. And that's why everybody left to go to YouTube.
Thank you so much for that. How do you see AI and automation affecting podcasting in the future?
Yeah, it's going to create a very weird kind of content ecosystem, because there's going to be these distinctions that are going to be increasingly required on the part of the content creator in when they publish things, that they have to identify whether it's AI or if it's not. And there's going to need to be, and this is already being discussed in the industry, there needs to be some sort of a standardization of doing this, right? That is consistent for everyone, so people don't feel like they're going to get somehow penalized if they do the ethical thing, as opposed to others that are not going to be doing that, as far as identifying what content is AI derived or not, right? So trying to create a fair landscape, and it's not too much different than what we've seen with TV ratings, right? Where there's different ratings for different types of content. And I think there's a derivative of that we'll probably see happen. And it's going to be probably required by the FCC or some government body or some kind of standards safety body that's going to come in and say, well, there's a risk here that content will be created with all AI, and that people will have the potential of being deceived, right, in what's real and what's not. And we need to kind of walk that line. So I think it's going to increasingly come into podcasting, especially as we move into this era of audio and video distribution for podcasting, and seeing, I think we're already seeing it happen in short form videos. There's increasing number of content creators that I'm hearing about too that are completely creating their whole show, audio and video, with AI, or they're just doing all of it with AI. And it could be in the host's voice, right? They went and created a clone of their voice at like 11 Labs or one of these AI platforms. And then what they do is they just take a transcript and they run it through that engine, and it outputs an audio file that actually sounds like the human, the real person, right? So where's that line? I mean, how do we draw this line between, or do we need to, if it's a cloned voice of the actual, host that could be doing the voice, it's going to sound like it. The content originally came from them. But, there's all these kind of gray areas of what is ethical to do and what isn't ethical to do in the podcast space. So that has still yet to be worked out. I think we're in this kind of early stage of, there's folks that are doing stuff that we don't always know. Fortunately, I think you can kind of tell sometimes what's AI and what's not still. But I think there is going to come a time, whether it's a year from now or 2 years from now, that you're really not going to be able to tell anymore. So I think that's a risk for the industry around credibility with audiences. And I think that's what we have to figure out.
Thank you so much for that. I see some of the podcasting hosts now, they have their own community guideline on using AI. I think I see ACAS, they have updated their community guidelines about using the AI right now. Do you think that because of this high innovative technology, do we really think we need to have like regulation in podcasting? Because as of now, it's unregulated. So there's nothing doing or like a watchdog about this.
Yeah, it's still kind of the early days of this, and I would like to think that we wouldn't have to do that kind of thing, because podcasting is, in its origin, has always been a medium that was open to do whatever you wanted to do. Right? It was like kind of like a blank canvas. But I think that blank canvas has not been potentially compromised with, deep fakes and things like that look like other people saying things that they didn't say. Or I think that there's just some danger areas that could come up in this area. But for now, I agree with you. I think that we are in this early stage, that the only way you can tell is just because of the quality of the reproduction. But eventually that's going to go away. You're not going to be able to tell. And once we get into that phase, then all bets are off, right? If we don't have any kind of thoughts on, content identification, or, and maybe we don't want to have that. Maybe we do want to live in a very open kind of content area. And I would prefer that, but I'm not sure that we ideally can trust everybody to do what would be perceived to others as kind of more trustworthy content. I'm not talking about the actual content itself, right? The topics or the focus of it as what I think it could be a form of censorship. I'm more, concerned about how we kind of move forward without losing trust in the audience. And it's not so much a censorship issue. It was more kind of like, is this real or not, right?
So, next question I have for you in connection with that: what is your advice to podcaster and also podcast producer who doing podcast show to be balanced at being authentic on what they're doing because of this AI as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and there's been a few others in the industry that have stated this, that there will probably be a division that will start to develop because of AI technology, where, people will boast that this is like what we're doing right now. This is real. There's no AI involved. And that could be seen as an advantage in the market, right? And so doing authentic, real, human-to-human content, or just solo human content, can be actually exclaimed as something that's unique and something that has added value and a higher level of trust, because you're actually seeing and hearing an actual human communicate in this content. So it could draw another level of authenticity and trust, that AI content. And that's what really the balance is here. Is I think a lot of the AI content creators would like to think that they can still maintain that level of authenticity and trust, even though they're using technology to create the content and not humans.
What do you think is the ethical consideration should podcaster keep in mind when, let's say, using AI in their show?
I think that most uses of AI in your show actually is okay, and I'm not sure that you have to identify it. Like if you're doing any kind of editing of the content that was created by a human that is a little more automated, that can streamline your process, make it easier and simpler, like a Descript platform does, where you can get in and pull out spaces in the content, dead air spaces of sorts, and then ums and ahs and filler words, things like that. I think those have value, and also maybe algorithms that can apply to the content that maybe makes the audio sound better, like noise reduction and all these kinds of things. But it also can be used for editing. It can also be used for outputting shorts and clips and things like that. I think those are valid uses for AI that don't really need to be disclosed. So, but I think when you start venturing into the realm of creating the whole thing with AI, the person that's doing the speaking and the visual imaging, all that stuff is all auto-generated by AI. I think that's a different kind of potential disclosure requirement.
Thank you so much for that, Rob. My last question for you, Rob, is that there recently have, if you see on LinkedIn or and on Facebook, there's a lot of people claiming that they can give you lots of downloads, lots of listener.
Yeah.
So how would we resolve this problem? Especially we have IAB podcast measurement criteria as well, but there's a lot of people doing that.
Well, they're trying to do it, right? And my comment would be that it's, it'll work to a point, right? It'll spike your download numbers because what they're doing is they're running a script across a panel of devices or phones to make requests for podcasts or drive traffic or whatever, but it's not authentic content, which means or authentic human requests of your content, right? So the minute that you stop doing it, guess what? You're going to go back to the old numbers that you had because it isn't really real. So that would be my only comment about it, is that sure, you can spike your numbers and it'll be a vanity play for you, but I'm not sure that it really has the same level of meaning that if you were to have done it organically and actually built connections with real humans. I think it has more potential for long-term benefit to you. And it also, not going after those cheap downloads or those fake downloads will actually save you some money too, because you won't be having to invest in a monthly spend to keep your numbers up just so you feel better about what you're doing. I think what you're better off is spending your money to advertise your show or promote your show to drive real authentic audience to your program. And that will create benefits for you from other kind of business opportunities, build your network, build other monetization practices that you can put into place more in the long run, right? So I think it's a very short-term approach that isn't really going to help you. I mean, that's not even to talk about the fraudulent aspect of it, but I'm not really focused on that. I'm more focused on, well, what's the benefit to the person that's buying that campaign? I'm not sure there is a bunch of benefit to it.
Thank you so much for that. Just a little bit, another question before we wrap up the show. What do you think is the next for podcaster and podcast producer? What will be the next happening in podcasting?
Yeah, that's hard to predict right now. I think that there's a lot of fluctuations in the market right now, but I do think increasing importance of video, I think, is probably the big thing that I'm taking away from it. And like I mentioned earlier, the podcast industry itself is a little bit pushing back on that because they've been a medium that's pretty much primarily been about audio. So I think the whole video side is going to increasingly drive a lot of change in the industry. And I think we're going to see increasingly that the video creators are going to start to dominate podcasting. And the audio side is going to have its role, but it may have a different kind of role than it has up till now. It'll be a supportive role to video as we look to the future. And then other types of content, it could be other types of storytelling programs, true crime, comedy podcasts. I've got all that stuff does well as audio only, as well as audiobooks. And there's lots of formats of shows that do really well and are ideal for audio only. But I do think that the video side would be the biggest thing that I can see on the horizon that's going to change the industry of podcasting. And I do think that the industry has to grapple with the other reality that there's not as many new content creators coming into podcasting with an audio only focus. So, I think all the energy right now, and I think into the near-term future, all the energy is going to come from video creators that are creating, video programs and then taking them out as audio podcasts as well.
Thank you so much, Rob. For our listener and also for watching this video right now, how can contact you if they have any question about podcasting?
Yeah, I have my own personal website. It's at robgreenlee.com, and it has links to all of the podcasts that I do, the live shows, the podcast about podcasting, and some other shows that I do are not necessarily about podcasting. So that's a great place. I'm on all the social platforms, typically with with my name at Rob Greenlee. So Facebook, LinkedIn, X. All those big platforms, in Instagram too, and so I can be found over there, as well as if you want to send me an email at all, I'm just at robgreenlee@gmail.com. Is a great way to reach out to me too if you desire to.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Rob Greenlee, the 2017 Podcast Hall of Fame, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it being on your show, and good luck to you with your show.
Thank you so much for that. So this is another episode of That Podcast Exchange, and this is Miko Santos. See you next week. For the latest of these stories and your podcast news any time of the day, don't forget to subscribe at pywires.com. We are always on, of course. You can follow us on social media as well at Pywires on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you need some help, just go to Podwars Marketplace if you want to check our podcast freelancer, our podcast independent producer.